You can't go back and you can't catch up. Happy endings are always bittersweet. Today I want to talk about Alfred BESTER and what I believe to be his finest book, The Dark Side of the Earth. This is Outlaw Bookseller talking about one of his favourite books of all time. Hi, welcome back to the channel. We seem to be over 1,000 subscribers. There will be acknowledgements videos coming up for everybody who has so kindly supported the channel, and something happened last week. People seemed to really get off on my Philip K. Dick Lies Inc. video and things went a bit crazy, which was great. It's 2 days since I had 2 of my teeth out and I'm still feeling a bit frazzled, so the shades are on again, I'm afraid. And I've got a lot of shooting to do this weekend to catch up. Now I'm feeling a bit better. Just to say, I know I've said this already on the community page, but we will be getting back to more varied content once the Jubilee week is out the way and once I can get a day off and go out and do some outdoor shooting. Because I'm very aware we're doing lots of SF, and I know lots of you love it, I love it, but we have other subscribers as well who like to see the psychogeography videos, the hauntology, the rock and roll, what have you, and the out and about videos, which I really enjoy doing. So there will be more of that, but for today we're going to do some more SF. So what are we going to do? We're going to do Alfred BESTER, and there's an awful lot of talk about BESTER. He's still not read enough, in my opinion, especially by younger readers. Pretty much all the attention that's lavished on BESTER is lavished upon his first 2 novels, which are both SF, The Demolished Man from 1953 and Tiger, aka The Star's My Destination from 1956. I still don't like that title. I mean, when I grew up with it, it was Tiger in Penguin and the Good Child edition, and it only started to have The Star's My Destination on the jacket about 85, 86, and I always thought it was a really bland, typical science fiction title. I always preferred the Blakean aspect of Tiger. And I want to talk about BESTER today because earlier in the week in the post I got this, which I'd wanted for a while, and it's absolutely beautiful. This is a Gollancz yellow jacket of The Light Fantastic, which is a short story collection. There were 2 of these. The other one is called Starlight, Starbright, and originally I think they were both in 1 volume. I'm not certain about that. I haven't checked the bibliography, and I've had them in Fontana paperbacks for many years, and I picked this up recently because there's a handful out there. The other one is super scarce. I've never seen it. I can't ever recall seeing it on sale. I think I saw one once a while ago online, and I sort of checked in with my friend Jim Goddard. Hey Jim, who's a collector of some repute and a well-read man in the field, and he confirmed for me that there was one, and he actually had it on the shelf behind him as we checked. So, you know, that's what you need in your chums, isn't it, really? So I had that in the post, and the stories I've read many times because I discovered BESTER when I was quite young, and he had a profound effect on me. So I want to talk today about the book which I feel is his best book. It could be that this is entirely subjective, I'm talking purely about my taste, but I feel his short story collection, The Dark Side of the Earth, which is here in Pan Lozenge, is his best book, and it's certainly my favourite book by him. It was bought for me in 1977. My father bought it for me on a trip to Cardiff, and my father used to have a hospital checkup about every 6 months in those days. He'd been very ill when I was young, and he used to go and have these regular checkups, and he would go to Cardiff, and he'd usually have to sort of wait around for, you know, quite a long time at the hospital to be seen. So he always used to turn it the day out, and he would buy me a book, and he bought me some great things, and he had really good instincts, and that was a book he bought me. I'd never heard of BESTER, and at that point I'd been reading SF, or trying to read it, since I was about 6 years old, and by the time I was about 10 I was into things like Wells, Wyndham, Verne, what have you. Pierre Boulle was another early one, Planet of the Apes for me. And then in 77 I bought myself Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep because I liked the title, and my father bought me that, and Harlan Ellison came shortly afterwards. And it blew people like Frank Herbert, Robert Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke just out of the water. You know, these are real writers who've got a real beautiful command of prose. So that was how I acquired the book. And it's a book I've read and read and reread again and again. And it's possibly my favourite ever science fiction collection. There's one other close runner, but in terms of chronology, this was my first love and probably will be for a long time. So I thought it was time probably to talk about that. And a while ago, when I was seeing my friend Graham, he had the stunning SF collection. Hey Graham. And I was filming up his house. I picked up a few things from his duplicates box, and he had this copy, which is a signet. This is a reprint, and the book first came out in 1964, and I was 1 year old, and I felt the need for another copy, and this is in great nick. So I'm going to talk to you about the dark side of the earth and why I think it's important. So as I say, everybody knows the novels, The Demolished Man and Tiger, The Star's My Destination. If you don't, then go and buy them now. They're in Gollancz Masterworks. They're very important because they provide a link from the best of the golden age, people like Henry Kuttner, through to the 60s new wave of people like Samuel L. Delaney and even cyberpunk. You know, Gibson was very influenced by BESTER. And as K.W. Jeter said, you know, there's nothing new about cyberpunk. It's just every few years people rediscover Alfred BESTER. And I do think he's got a point because the energy, the glittering prose, is all there. So just to talk a bit more about the dark side of the earth. All the stories in it, there are 7 of them. And it's a short book, as you can see. And it's, for me, it's word perfect. The beauty of it is that those stories, they're all different, and yet they're all the same. They're very common stylistic sort of thing, which is clearly BESTER's voice, and a very beautiful voice. And I think 5 of the 7 were published in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction between 1953 and 1963, and there are 2 stories in here which I think were originals to this volume. Now, there is no hardcover edition of The Dark Side of the Earth. There never has been. If there was, I'd have it. But it has appeared in a hardcover omnibus from Sidgwick in the late 60s called the Alfred BESTER Omnibus. Sidgwick did quite a few of them, and they are very expensive, hard to find, not particularly beautiful. And the Sidgwick one has got the first 2 novels, and it's got that collection in it, so maybe one day I'll come across one, who knows. No luck yet. So why am I so enamored of this collection? Well, I just want to talk about the stories one by one and give you an insight into them. Now, of course, BESTER, one of the reasons why he was so good as a writer was that he worked in all sorts of fields and he was a real pro. And, you know, even though he started off loving science fiction, started writing science fiction at the very end of the 30s, he had stuff in magazines, you know, at that point, early 40s. His first really great story that I love is a story called Adam and No Eve. And Adam and No Eve I first actually read as a comic book adaptation and a reprint of a UK Marvel comic. And that story is in this collection, Virtual Unrealities, which is an iBook. I think you can still get this print on demand. And this contains all the stories which are in Dark Side of the Earth. Some of his other best stories, some unpublished material. So it's a great one to pick up. But do try and get the Dark Side of the Earth if you can. You can usually pick it up for a £5. It's very, very cheap usually. Pan did several editions over the years. It hasn't been in print in the UK since that one, so I've never been able to sell it, which has always broken my heart as a bookseller. So I'm just going to talk through them one by one. And the book opens with a story called Time is the Traitor. That quotation I read at the beginning of the video is the opening line. So I'm going to read it again and talk to you about the story. You can't go back and you can't catch up. Happy endings are always bittersweet. Straight away you have this hard-bitten, direct, evocative, axiomatic style. And people talk about the influence of, you know, crime fiction over things like cyberpunk. And, you know, it comes from this. Because BESTER, as I say, he worked in different sort of mediums as a writer. Started in SF. He wrote comic strips. He did some of the classic superheroes for DC. all sorts of other things. He did radio writing. By the end of the 40s, he was writing for radio and then for TV. And you know, he was a pro, and he got a lot of bad writing out of his system, as he said, by doing these things, and moved into good writing. And he really sort of wanted to do something with SF. And he was one of those people who actually read James Joyce at the same time he was reading Martian Odyssey. You know, so he was the real thing that way. Now, there are affinities between Time is the Traitor and the Demolished Man. The Demolished Man appeared in Galaxy magazine, I think, in 1952 as a serial. And Bester writes in non-fiction pieces about how Horace L. Gold, the editor of Galaxy, helped him sort of with the story and the angle and what have you. And, you know, undoubtedly he played a big part in its composition. Now, Time is the Traitor appeared in 1953, which is the year, of course, that Demolished won the very first Hugo Award for Best Novel. And there's a certain sort of similarity, there's an intensity. Even more so, the sort of central character of Time is the Traitor, in a way, to me, is a bit of a dry run for Gully Foyle, because it's about a guy called John Strap. And I'm going to read you another section from the story now. And this is what it says. There was a man named John Strap, the most valuable, the most powerful, the most legendary man in a world containing 700 planets and 1700 billion people. He was prized for one quality alone. He could make decisions. Note the capital D. He was one of the few men who could make major decisions in a world of incredible complexity, and his decisions were 87% correct. He sold his decisions for high profits. It's a wonderful story. I'm not going to tell you too much about it. I've always wanted to see it made into film because I think it's a wonderful film. And when you read it and you compare it to what else was happening in SF at the time, you can see the influence that Bester must have had over people like Dick and Sheckley. Obviously Sheckley was writing by then, Dick was working at it as well. But you can see the focus, the tautness. It's a story of obsession. And John Strap, in a way, is a bit of a forerunner for Gully Foyle, because something happens to Strap which galvanizes him and makes him what he is and isn't completely understandable. So, you know, if you enjoy The Star's My Destination, Tiger, Time is the Traitor is the one. And it's Bester's language is just so wonderful, because he was an ad man. He'd written copywriting, he'd worked in television, he'd worked in fast moving media. You know, he was very snappy and flashy, and he was a showman, and that's why he was such a great SF writer. He was audacious and hysterical, and he said that hysteria was a very important part in his writing, and everybody knew him, talks about his character. I wish I'd met him. I went to the Worldcon 87 in Brighton, where he was going to be guest of honour, and he couldn't come because he was sick, and he died shortly after. And, you know, I was gutted because I really wanted to meet Bester more than anybody, you know, and he was great. But the other stories in here are from later dates. They're mostly from the late 50s, and by that point, of course, Bester had finished his second SF novel. In between, he wrote another novel, this one here, The Rat Race, originally entitled Who He, which is a thriller set in the world of television. I think there's a print-on-demand edition. This is an old Hamlin one, which I remember buying way back. This was just about still in print in about 84. I haven't read it for years. I need to reread it. But like all Alfred Bester's work, it's well worth going back to. He wasn't just an SF writer, and that's the thing. A lot of these great writers could do other things as well. Look at Harlan Ellison. He wrote things for all sorts of magazines. Silverberg could write, you know, non-fiction really well in children's books. So, you know, there's something to be said for these guys who were writers first. After that opening story is a wonderful, funny story called The Men Who Murdered Muhammad, which is about time travel. It's really funny and snappy. It's probably my favourite time travel story, and I can't say enough good about that. I really don't want to give any spoilers. There's a wonderful story in here which is not from the magazines called Out of This World, and it begins with this amazing line. I'm telling this just the way it happened, because I share a vice with all men. Although I'm happily married and still in love with my wife, I keep falling in love with transient women. I stop for a red light, glance at a girl in the cab alongside, and fall desperately in love with her. You know, and this is an experience that everybody knows. It reads like something from Mad Men. It's really snappy. It's New York. It's flashy. It's short. I've woven a fantasy of dating this stranger, meeting her, having an affair with her, breaking up my home, running off to Capri and living a glorious sin. and that sort of thing. And it's sort of romantic and sort of devil may care. But it's also, well, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but if you like The Man in the High Castle, you should read it. So it's a similar take on a different thing, or a different take on a similar thing. So that's out of this world, and it's great. The most important story in here is a story from the end of the 50s, which I think is, in my view, one of the most important science fiction stories ever written. I put it in my top 3 or 4. And that's a story called The Pi Man. And that's pi as in the mathematical formula, pi. And The Pi Man is a narrative about a first-person narrative. They're mostly first-person narratives, and that's what's good about these, is that there's a mix. And Bester's great in first-person. He's equally good in third-person, because he paints a broader picture. But in first-person, he's really frenetic and burning. And it's about a man who has an ability which isn't really explained, to do with patterns and how things need to be made harmonious, and how he's never at peace until there are patterns and things. So it kind of mirrors the idea of obsessive compulsive, where you have to have things lined up neatly, what have you, if your book's 8 as a both, and so on. And it's not just that, it's the way it's written. It has the typographical experiments, as you see here and here, which are common for things like Demolished, where they used to convey, the espers. They are all about patterns, and it's a wonderful, wonderful story. They are very off their time, but their time is very exciting. It's Madison Avenue, New York, glittering, hard, urban, upbeat sort of times and places, and it's just wonderful. And it's got the tension in it, and the release, the glamour, and the fireworks are going off all the time in this story. I'm just going to read you a bit. How to say, how to write, when sometimes I can be fluent, even polished, and then it takes hold of me. Push, force, compel. Sometimes I must go back, but not to jump. No, not even to jump better. I have no control over self, speech, love, fate. I must compensate, always. And it's about compensation and what this character does. He perceives patterns and nobody else does. And I'm not going to tell you anymore. I keep saying that, I know, because I want you to read it. And for me, this is sort of the beginning of new wave in SF, that story. There are other things which feed into it, but it's this story more than any which sort of shows the way forward, I feel, for SF. And it's just staggeringly good, and I read and read and reread it. It's another story in here which is not from magazine sources, as far as I'm aware, called The Flowered Thundermug, which is very, very funny. It's very Sheckley-esque, except it's tauter, fuller, and better than Sheckley, in my opinion. The Flowered Thundermug. A thundermug, of course, is a chamber pot, and if you know what that is, you're going to have to look it up, because I'm not going to use the crude term it's referred to generally. That's a really funny story, and it's got an amazing ending, which is just raises the hairs on my neck and my arms. And a lot of things in this book really sort of get hold of you and pull you up, and they're really quite something. I can't be objective about it, it's too amazing. So Flowered Thundermug is great fun. Looking through this again, it's funny as well. It's a funny book. There's a story called Will You Wait? It's a classic thing where one of the old sort of story things is to bargain with the devil, and this is what Bester says about this. They keep writing those antiquated stories about bargains with the devil. Sulphur, spells and pentagrams, tricks, snares and delusions. They don't know what they're talking about. 20th century diabolism is slick and streamlined, like jukeboxes and automatic elevators and television and all the other modern efficiencies that leave you helpless and infuriated. So even then, now we get annoyed when the streaming doesn't work. I mean, even back in, the late 50s, modern life was rubbish. The whole thing about hell is other people. The hell in this is of modern bureaucracy, and it's just brilliant. And you can imagine, the sort of guys like Paul and Cornwall and Sheckley thinking, wow, this is great. It's like what we do, but it's even better. Really, really funny. The final story in this, the 7th story, They Don't Make Life Like They Used To, was the latest one. It was written 63, 64. And it's an end of the world, no survivors, Adam and Eve story with a very different Adam and a very different Eve. It's just beautifully delineated. The characters are fantastic. They're very different from each other. It's not the classic thing of boy meets girl and they decide straight away they've got to get into bed and keep the population going and stuff. And again, amazing ending with some unexpected stuff. And very lyrical and Bradbury-esque. If you imagine Ray Bradbury in a slightly more, how can we put it without being crude, Ray Bradbury who then sort of suddenly decides that maybe it's time to get it on. That's a little insight into one of my favourite books. Do pick it up and read it if you can, because if you like Bester's language and if you've enjoyed Demolished and Tiger, this shows him at his best in the shorter forms. There's a lot of talk about him in the shorter form. There's talk about a story called Fondly Fahrenheit, which is great, but I think it's overrated compared to some of the stories in Dark Side. There are lots of other great stories, but the ones in that, I think the finest. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm sentimental. Maybe it's who bought it for me when I read it. The fact that I've read and read and read it. But I personally think it's the one of the finest short story collections I've ever read. So we will talk more about Bester. Something to try and pick up if you can. Again, this is iBooks as well. I'm sure you can get these print on demand. Is Demolished. A huge chunky selection of fiction and non-fiction. Some great stuff in here. There's really good stories in here. There's autobiographical pieces, what have you. There's essays and interviews he did with people like Woody Allen and Isaac Asimov. Because of course, the reason Bester stopped writing SF was because he got a job, an editor's job at Holiday magazine, which was a big glossy magazine, and he did that for about 25 years. And and he did lots of exciting sort of travel pieces and sort of interviews, and he jet setted around the world. And he was a good time guy. He liked to drink, he liked good food, he liked to get out and about. And so he used SF as an escape valve. He still used to write non-fiction for some of the magazines up until the 60s, and he would critique a lot of the writing a lot, and he was very dissatisfied with the standards in SF. He was somebody who had a piecemeal career. At some point I'm going to do a video and talk about his other work in depth, because I feel his later novels are often dismissed. They do have some good things about them. I'll talk a bit more about The Rat Race, his novel Tender Loving Rage. This is just a gentle one to ease us back in. So I hope you enjoy that. Get out there, get yourself a copy of Dark Side of the Earth. This is Outlaw Bookseller signing out for now. Bye.